The neon sign of the Sunrise Diner buzzed a familiar, comforting pink against the rain-slicked pavement of the downtown loft district, casting long, deceptive shadows. Inside, Kendall wiped down the worn Formica counter, her smile perfectly rehearsed for the late-night regulars. But beneath her grease-stained apron, her hand trembled over a positive pregnancy test she couldn't explain. She was going home to Liam, her husband of 4 years, yet the text glowing on her silenced phone was from Michael, a message that carried the dangerous weight of a life she wasn't supposed to have. If you find yourself captivated by the quiet, dangerous moments where ordinary lives shatter and secrets bleed through the cracks, stay with me. There is so much more hidden behind these closed doors. The rain over the downtown loft district didn't fall so much as it drifted, a miserable, freezing mist that clung to the asphalt and blurred the neon lights of the Sunrise Diner. It was 11:45 p.m. on a Tuesday. The diner smelled of stale coffee, burnt hash browns, and the damp wool of coats belonging to people who worked too many hours for too little pay. Liam Moore sat in the corner booth, nursing a mug of black coffee that had gone cold 20 minutes ago. His knuckles were bruised, the skin rough and calloused from another 12-hour shift, moving pallets at the freight warehouse. His heavy steel-toed boots left wet marks on the scuffed linoleum floor. He didn't mind the wait. He never did. Watching Kendall move behind the counter, her dark hair pulled back in a messy bun, the faded pink uniform hugging her tired frame, was the quiet anchor of his exhausting days. They didn't have much. The rent on their small apartment on the edge of the district took almost everything they made, but Liam believed in the gospel of hard work. He believed in them. Behind the register, Kendall punched in the final order of the night. Her fingers were stiff, but her mind was entirely somewhere else. She forced a polite, mechanical smile at the trucker handing her a wrinkled $5 bill, but her eyes kept darting to the glowing screen of her phone, half hidden beneath a stack of receipts. "I need to see you. Now." The text was from Michael. Kendall swallowed hard, a sudden wave of nausea rolling through her stomach that had nothing to do with the diner's greasy air. It had been happening for a week. The dizzy spells, the aversion to the smell of frying bacon, the heavy, sinking dread in her chest. "I'll be right back," Kendall murmured to the busboy, untying her apron with jerky movements. She avoided looking at Liam's booth as she hurried down the narrow, dimly lit hallway toward the employee restroom. The door clicked shut, the lock sliding into place with a hollow snap. Kendall leaned against the cold porcelain sink, her breath coming in shallow, ragged gasps. Her purse was hanging on the back of the door. With trembling hands, she unzipped the side pocket and pulled out the small, plastic stick she had bought on her break at the pharmacy next door. She stared at it. The harsh fluorescent light above the mirror buzzed like an angry hornet. 2 solid pink lines, pregnant. Kendall gripped the edges of the sink, her knuckles turning white as she stared at her own terrified reflection. A child, a baby in their cramped, leaky apartment. A baby on Liam's warehouse salary and her diner tips. But the fear that paralyzed her wasn't about money. It was a darker, more suffocating terror. She pressed a hand to her flat stomach, closing her eyes as a tear escaped, cutting a hot path down her cheek. She thought of Liam, loyal, steady, waiting in the booth for her with his cold coffee. And then she thought of Michael, his tailored coats, the smell of expensive cologne that lingered on her skin after their hurried, breathless afternoons in his luxury hotel room across town. The way Michael looked at her, like she was meant for high-rises and champagne, not diner coffee and bus passes. Whose child was it? She genuinely didn't know. The math blurred in her head, a chaotic timeline of her husband's quiet devotion and her lover's intoxicating poison. A knock on the bathroom door made her jump. "Kenny?" Liam's voice was muffled, thick with gentle concern. "You all right in there, babe? Shift's over." Kendall shoved the plastic test deep to the bottom of the trash can, covering it with a handful of rough paper towels. She wiped her eyes, took a deep, shuddering breath, and unlocked the door. Liam was standing there, his broad shoulders stooped slightly from exhaustion, a soft, easy smile on his face. He reached out, his rough thumb brushing a stray lock of hair behind her ear. "You look beat," he said softly. "Let's get you home." Kendall looked up into her husband's trusting, completely oblivious eyes. The weight of the secret felt like a physical stone in her throat. She managed a fragile nod. "Yeah," she whispered, stepping past him into the diner, her phone buzzing silently in her pocket once more. Let's go home. The drive back to their apartment was agonizingly quiet. The heater in Liam's 10-year-old sedan was broken, blowing only a lukewarm breath against the freezing rain lashing the windshield. Liam drove with one hand on the steering wheel, his other hand resting heavily on Kendall's knee, his thumb drawing slow, comforting circles on her faded denim jeans. Every brush of his rough, callous skin sent a fresh spike of guilt straight to her chest, making it difficult to pull air into her lungs. Their apartment building sat on the frayed edge of the downtown loft district, a stark contrast to the sleek, renovated high-rises just 5 blocks away. It was a walk-up, 3rd floor, smelling faintly of boiled cabbage and damp carpet. When Liam unlocked the door, the chill of the room greeted them. He immediately moved to the small space heater in the corner, clicking it on before turning to help Kendall out of her damp coat. "Get into something warm," he said, his voice a low, soothing rumble in the quiet room. "I'll make you some chamomile tea. You looked like you were going to pass out during the dinner rush." Kendall nodded, unable to meet his eyes. "Just a headache," she lied, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. "It's been a long week." She retreated to their narrow bedroom and closed the door. The moment the latch clicked, the facade crumbled. Her knees buckled slightly, and she sank onto the edge of the mattress, burying her face in her hands. The image of the 2 pink lines was burned into her retinas, a glowing neon sign spelling out the end of everything she knew. A baby. She imagined a child with Liam's kind, trusting eyes growing up in this very room, surrounded by peeling wallpaper and the constant anxiety of unpaid bills. Then, unbidden, the image shifted. She saw a child in a pristine, sunlit nursery, the kind of room Michael had casually mentioned when talking about his sister's new house in the suburbs. Michael, who wore tailored suits and left $100 tips without blinking. Michael, who made her feel like she wasn't just a diner waitress fading into the background of a gritty city. Her phone vibrated against her thigh, a harsh buzz in the stillness of the room. She pulled it from her pocket. The screen illuminated the dim space, casting a pale, ghostly light over her pale face. "You can't ignore me forever, Kendall. Tell me when you're free. I have something for you." She stared at the text, the cursor blinking on the empty reply line. Her stomach gave a violent lurch, a sudden wave of morning sickness striking hours too late. She clamped a hand over her mouth, tossing the phone onto the bed, and rushed to the tiny attached bathroom. She turned on the faucet, letting the cold water run over her wrists, splashing her face until the nausea subsided into a dull, throbbing ache. She looked at herself in the mirror. The woman staring back looked like a stranger, hollow-eyed, terrified, and fundamentally ruined. "Tea's ready, Kenny," Liam called softly from the other side of the bedroom door, rapping his knuckles gently against the wood. "Can I come in?" Kendall gripped the edges of the sink, closing her eyes tight. She took a deep, trembling breath, forcing the shattered pieces of her composure back into a fragile shell. She walked back into the bedroom, her eyes landing on the glowing screen of her phone, still displaying Michael's demanding message. With a quick, decisive swipe, she cleared the notification and slipped the phone under her pillow. "Yeah," Kendall called back, plastering on a weak, loving smile as the door swung open. "I'm decent." The rhythmic thud of wooden pallets hitting the concrete floor echoed through the cavernous expanse of the logistics warehouse. Dust motes danced in the harsh beams of the overhead sodium lights, settling on the sweat-slicked shoulders of the men moving cargo. Liam hoisted a heavy crate, his muscles straining against the worn fabric of his uniform, and secured it onto the forklift. A few yards away, Kevin Walsh leaned against a stack of shrink-wrapped boxes, wiping a grease-stained rag across his rough hands. Kevin had known Liam for 3 years. He knew the man's relentless work ethic, his quiet dignity, and most importantly, his absolute, unshakable devotion to his wife. So when Kendall appeared at the loading dock entrance just past noon, clutching a brown paper bag holding Liam's forgotten lunch, Kevin paid attention. She looked entirely out of place among the forklift exhaust and industrial shelving, her pink diner uniform barely hidden beneath a heavy trench coat. But it wasn't her attire that caught Kevin's eye. It was her posture. She stood rigid, her shoulders tight, her gaze darting nervously toward the exit rather than searching the floor for her husband. "Hey!" Liam's voice cut through the mechanical hum, thick with genuine surprise and affection. He dropped his heavy leather work gloves on a nearby barrel and jogged toward her, wiping a streak of dirt from his forehead with the back of his wrist. "You didn't have to drive all the way down here for a sandwich, Kenny." Kendall managed a tight, fragile smile, thrusting the bag forward almost defensively. "You forgot it on the counter. I had a break before my afternoon shift." She didn't lean in when Liam stepped closer. In fact, Kevin watched her subtly shift her weight backward, creating an invisible, deliberate barrier between them. Liam, blinded by the simple, exhausting joy of seeing her, didn't notice. He reached out to gently squeeze her shoulder, and Kevin saw Kendall's microscopic flinch, a sharp intake of breath, her eyes widening briefly, as if the innocent contact physically burned her skin. Her phone buzzed loudly from deep within her coat pocket. Once, twice, 3 times in rapid, demanding succession. "Everything okay?" Liam asked, his brow furrowing slightly as the buzzing continued. "Just the diner group chat," Kendall lied smoothly, though her knuckles turned stark white as she gripped the strap of her purse. "Someone needs a shift covered. I should get back." "Thanks for this," Liam said, raising the paper bag, his eyes softening. "I love you." "Me too," she murmured, the response hollow, rehearsed, and utterly devoid of warmth. She turned on her heel and walked briskly out of the loading bay, stepping back into the damp city air without a backward glance. Kevin tossed his rag onto a crate and walked over to where Liam was unwrapping a foil-wrapped turkey sandwich, a content smile still lingering on his tired face. "Nice of her to drop that by," Kevin said, keeping his tone carefully neutral. "She's the best," Liam replied, taking a bite. "Works too hard, though. She's been looking exhausted lately, getting sick to her stomach in the mornings. I keep telling her to take a day off." Kevin paused, his eyes narrowing slightly as he looked toward the empty, sunlit doorway where Kendall had just disappeared. He thought about the frantic, insistent buzzing of her phone, the way she had recoiled from her husband's touch, the restless, haunted look in her eyes that had absolutely nothing to do with being tired from diner shifts. He had seen that exact look before, in his own failed marriage, right before the floor gave way. "Liam, man." Kevin started, choosing his words with surgical caution. "You guys doing all right? I mean, really all right?" Liam stopped chewing, looking at his friend with mild, innocent confusion. "Yeah, why wouldn't we be?" "I don't know," Kevin muttered, rubbing the back of his neck, suddenly feeling the immense weight of his own suspicion. "She just seemed somewhere else today, jumpier than usual, like she was waiting for the other shoe to drop." Liam's expression hardened just a fraction, a defensive wall instantly erecting around his marriage. "She's stressed, Kev. We're trying to save up. Get out of that leaky apartment. It takes a toll on her. She's just tired." Kevin looked at Liam's earnest, fiercely loyal face and knew there was no point in pushing. You couldn't force a man to see the smoke when he fundamentally refused to believe in the fire. "Yeah," Kevin said quietly, clapping a heavy, sympathetic hand on Liam's shoulder. "You're right. Probably just tired." But as the roar of a reversing forklift filled the heavy silence between them, Kevin knew with a sinking, terrible certainty that the storm wasn't just coming. It was already inside Liam's house. The radiator in the corner of the living room was clanking, a steady, metallic rhythm that usually faded into the background of their evenings. Tonight, it sounded like a countdown. Liam walked through the front door at 8 p.m., his shoulders aching, his heavy boots trailing the slush of the street onto the faded entryway rug. He carried a small, grease-spotted paper bag, 2 slices of cherry pie from the bakery down the block. It was a quiet peace offering for the strange, tense distance that had settled between them over the past week. "Kenny?" he called out, nudging the door shut with his hip. The apartment was mostly dark, save for the single yellow lamp on the small dining table. Kendall was sitting there. She wasn't wearing her pink diner uniform, nor her usual faded sweatpants. Instead, she wore a sleek, black cashmere sweater, a garment Liam had never seen before, its expensive fabric entirely foreign to their lives. Her hands were folded neatly on the scratched wooden surface, her posture rigid, her face an unreadable mask. "I bought pie," Liam said, his voice faltering slightly as the heavy silence of the room pressed against him. He set the bag on the counter. "Cherry, your favorite." Kendall didn't look at the bag. She looked at him, her eyes hollow, deliberately drained of the familiar warmth that had tethered him to this difficult life for 4 years. "Sit down, Liam," she said. Her voice was flat, devoid of any tremor. Liam remained standing. His heart began a slow, heavy thud against his ribs. The memory of Kevin's warning at the warehouse suddenly flared in his mind, sharp and unwelcome. "What's wrong? Did something happen at work?" "I'm leaving," Kendall said, the 2 words slicing through the stagnant air with surgical precision. Liam blinked, his tired mind struggling to process the syntax. "Leaving? Like a trip? A visit to your sisters? I want a divorce." The clanking of the radiator seemed to deafen him. Liam felt the blood drain from his face, a cold, prickling sensation washing over his scalp. He took an unsteady step forward, his hands instinctively reaching out. "Kenny, wait. What are you talking about? Did I do something? We can fix it, whatever it is." "There is nothing to fix," she interrupted, her tone sharp, defensive. She stood up, wrapping her arms tightly around herself. Beneath the soft cashmere, her stomach churned with the secret she carried, the biological ticking bomb that had forced this moment into existence. Michael had texted her an hour ago, "End it tonight, or I walk away. I'm suffocating here, Liam. Look around. This apartment, the diner, your warehouse shifts, it's never going to change. We're saving," Liam pleaded, his voice breaking. The exhaustion of his 12-hour shift vanished, replaced by a raw, blinding panic. "I'm picking up overtime next week. We talked about this. We just need a little more time." "I don't have time," Kendall snapped, her voice rising, tinged with a sudden, ugly cruelty. It was a calculated defense mechanism. If she made him the villain, if she focused on his inability to provide the life she desperately wanted, she wouldn't have to face the monstrous reality of what she was actually doing. "You're a warehouse worker, Liam. You're always going to be a warehouse worker. I can't spend the rest of my life counting pennies and waiting for a future that is never going to come." Liam stood frozen, the words hitting him like physical blows. He had spent 4 years breaking his back to build a floor beneath her feet, and she was looking at him as if he were the dirt she was scraping off her shoes. Is there someone else?" he asked, the question barely a whisper, slipping from his lips before he could stop it. Kendall's gaze didn't waver. She thought of Michael, of the luxury hotel, of the 2 pink lines on the plastic stick buried deep in the diner's trash can. She armored herself in ice. "Don't flatter yourself," she said coldly. "I'm leaving because of you, because this isn't enough." She walked past him, grabbing a pre-packed leather duffel bag by the door. Liam didn't try to stop her. He couldn't move. He stood perfectly still in the dim light, the scent of cherry pie hanging uselessly in the air, listening to the heavy, final click of the apartment door, closing behind the only woman he had ever loved. The fluorescent lights of the First National Bank branch on 4th Street emitted a low, persistent hum that vibrated in Liam's teeth. He sat in a rigid faux leather chair opposite a glass desk, staring at the small placard that read, "Account Services." The air smelled of industrial carpet cleaner and stale printer ink. It had been exactly 4 days since Kendall walked out of the apartment. 4 days of Liam sleeping in his car in the warehouse parking lot, staring at the frost gathering on his windshield, waiting to wake up from a nightmare that only seemed to deepen. Kendall sat in the chair next to him, though she might as well have been in another time zone. She wore a tailored beige trench coat, her posture impeccably straight, her eyes fixed entirely on the stack of withdrawal and transfer forms the teller was organizing. She hadn't looked at Liam since they walked through the revolving glass doors. "So, as requested, we are closing the joint savings account." The teller, a young woman with a cheerful disposition that felt almost violent in the heavy silence, said briskly, "The balance is $6,420. Miss Martin, you requested a cashier's check for $5,000. With the remainder dispensed in cash to Mr. Moore?" Liam blinked, his heavy, bloodshot eyes shifting slowly to Kendall. That money was their emergency fund. It was the result of 2 years of his double shifts at the freight yard, saved penny by penny to fix the sedan's transmission, and maybe, just maybe, put a down payment on a modest duplex outside the city. "Kendall?" Liam's voice was raspy, hollowed out by exhaustion. "5,000? She finally turned her head, but her gaze stopped at his collarbone, refusing to meet his eyes. "I need first and last month's rent for a new place, Liam. Plus a deposit. I can't stay at the old apartment." "The memories are It's too much. I'm taking my name off the lease. It was a lie, meticulously fed to her by Michael, who had convinced her that stripping the joint assets was her legal right, a necessary step before they could combine their finances and look for a penthouse. She had to sever all ties, Michael had insisted, leaving no loose ends. Liam looked at the woman he had promised to protect for the rest of his life. He saw the nervous tremor in her fingers as she clutched her expensive new leather purse, the way her jaw clenched. A stranger wearing his wife's face. He could have fought her. He could have frozen the account, hired a cheap lawyer, dragged her through the mud of mediation, but the profound, crushing betrayal he felt had sapped the fight entirely out of his bones. If she wanted to dismantle their life, he would not beg her to keep the pieces. "Fine," Liam whispered, the words scraping against his dry throat. "Take it." The teller slid the paperwork across the glass desk. The scratching of Kendall's pen was deafeningly loud. She signed her name with quick, aggressive strokes, eager to finalize the theft and escape the suffocating presence of the man she was destroying. When it was Liam's turn, his hand shook slightly. He signed his name, officially erasing the financial foundation of their marriage. The teller handed him a thin envelope containing $1,400. It was all he had left in the world. They walked out of the bank together in suffocating silence, stepping onto the rain-slicked pavement of the Loft District. The afternoon sky was a bruised, heavy purple. "I'll have my brother come by the apartment tomorrow to get the rest of my things," Kendall said to the street, wrapping her coat tighter against the biting wind. "Leave the keys under the mat when you go. The landlord knows you're breaking the lease." Liam stopped walking. "I'm breaking the lease? I told him we couldn't afford it anymore," she said quickly, her voice defensively sharp. "You can't pay the rent on your own, Liam. You know that. It's better this way." She didn't wait for a response. She turned and walked briskly down the block, her heels clicking a steady, merciless rhythm against the concrete, disappearing into the gray mist of the city. Liam stood alone on the corner, the thin envelope burning in his jacket pocket, realizing with a cold, terrifying clarity that he had nowhere to go. The Starlight Motel sat on a crumbling frontage road just off Interstate 95, a relic of the 1970s that survived exclusively on desperation and transient misery. The neon sign outside Liam's window buzzed with a frantic, dying energy, casting rhythmic flashes of sickly blue light across the stained wallpaper of room 114. The air inside smelled faintly of industrial bleach and decades of stale cigarette smoke. Liam sat on the edge of the sagging mattress, staring blankly at the cracked veneer of the nightstand. On it lay the thin white envelope from the bank, containing exactly $1,400, his entire net worth, the sum total of 4 years of double shifts, bruised knuckles, and blind faith. He hadn't taken off his heavy steel-toed boots. He hadn't even taken off his damp jacket. For the past 3 hours, he had simply existed in the quiet, suffocating vacuum of the room, listening to the relentless hiss of tires on the wet asphalt outside. The chill of the room was seeping into his bones, but he couldn't bring himself to move. The physical exhaustion of the freight yard was nothing compared to the phantom weight pressing down on his chest. It was the heavy, suffocating realization of an erased future. Just a week ago, he had been calculating the interest on a mortgage for a small duplex in the suburbs. He had been imagining the sound of Kendall's voice in a kitchen that didn't have peeling paint. Now, he was calculating how many weeks he could survive on cheap ramen and gas station coffee before the cash in the envelope ran dry. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. The screen was cracked in the top left corner, a spider web of glass he had meant to fix, but never got around to because they needed the money for groceries. He unlocked it. The screen illuminated his tired, hollowed-out face. No new messages. Out of a masochistic habit, he opened their text thread. The last message he had sent was 5 days ago. "I bought pie. Cherry. Your favorite. Be home soon." She had never replied. She had simply waited in the dark to dismantle his life. Liam pressed the heel of his hand against his eyes until sparks danced in the darkness. The betrayal wasn't just a wound, it was a total demolition. How had he missed the signs? Had she always looked at him with that cold, calculating detachment, and he had simply chosen to see love? He remembered the way she had flinched at the warehouse when he touched her shoulder, the frantic buzzing of her phone, the expensive black cashmere sweater she wore the night she ended it. A piece of clothing he knew she couldn't afford on diner tips. A heavy, sickening realization began to coalesce in the freezing room. There was someone else. There had to be. The suddenness, the brutal efficiency of the bank transfer, the aggressive erasure of his name from the lease. It wasn't just a woman suffocating in a working-class marriage. It was a woman clearing the runway for a new life she had already secured. The blue neon light flickered, plunging the room into brief, absolute darkness before buzzing back to life. Liam lowered his hands. His eyes were dry, but they burned with a profound, terrifying emptiness. He slowly unlaced his boots, letting them drop to the cheap carpet with a dull thud. He placed the bank envelope inside his jacket pocket and zipped it shut, pulling his collar up as he lay back on the thin, scratchy bedspread. He didn't turn on the television. He didn't sleep. He just stared at the water stains on the ceiling, listening to the freeway, waiting for the long, brutal night to pass. Michael's apartment in the Pearl District was everything Kendall had imagined. Floor-to-ceiling windows, white marble countertops, and the faint, ever-present scent of expensive sandalwood. It was a world away from the damp cabbage smell of the walk-up she had shared with Liam, a world away from the greasy linoleum of the Sunrise Diner. Yet, as she stood by the expansive glass, looking out over the glittering city skyline, a strange, cold knot twisted in her stomach. It was the morning sickness, she told herself, just the pregnancy. She hadn't told Michael about the baby yet. She was waiting for the perfect moment, perhaps after the dust of her brutal divorce had fully settled and they were looking at rings. Michael walked up behind her, sliding his arms around her waist. He wore a crisp, tailored dress shirt, the cuffs casually rolled up, a heavy silver watch catching the ambient light of the city. He kissed the side of her neck, but the contact felt strangely rehearsed, lacking the rough, desperate warmth of the husband she had left behind in a motel room. "You look beautiful in this place, Kendall," he murmured, handing her a glass of sparkling water. She had claimed a sudden, vague aversion to wine. "Like you finally belong." Kendall leaned back into him, forcing her tense muscles to relax. "It feels like a dream. Everything happened so fast." "The best things always do," Michael said smoothly. He stepped away, walking toward the kitchen island to refill his own glass of scotch. The ice clinked against the crystal, sharp and loud in the minimalist, quiet room. He paused, leaning against the marble, his brow furrowing in a calculated display of mild frustration. "Is something wrong?" Kendall asked, moving away from the window, the chill of the glass clinging to her cashmere sweater. Michael sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "Just a minor headache with my broker. It's ridiculous, really. An international wire transfer got flagged by the compliance department. They've temporarily frozen my primary checking account until Monday while they verify the funds." Kendall's heart skipped a beat, a faint, instinctual alarm ringing in the back of her mind. "Are you okay? Is it serious?" "Oh, it's fine. Just an automated security protocol," he laughed, waving a hand dismissively. "It's just terribly inconvenient. I have a contractor needing a deposit for the penthouse renovations tomorrow morning, and my liquid cash is tied up for the weekend." He took a slow sip of his scotch, his dark eyes locking onto hers over the rim of the glass. The silence stretched between them, heavy and suddenly expectant. "You know," Michael started, his voice dropping an octave, slipping into that soft, intimate cadence that always made her feel like the most important woman in the world. "You mentioned you pulled your half of the savings from the joint account during the separation. 5,000, right?" Kendall froze. Her fingers tightened instinctively around the stem of her water glass. That money was her only lifeline. It was the stolen foundation of her escape, the safety net Liam had broken his back to build. "Yes," she whispered, her throat suddenly dry as ash. "For my temporary place, before I move in here properly." "Right, exactly," Michael smiled, closing the distance between them. He reached out, gently stroking her pale cheek. "I was wondering if you could spot me the cash for the contractor tomorrow. Just a temporary float. I'll have my bank wire you 7,000 on Monday for the trouble. Consider it an investment in our future." Kendall stared into his perfectly symmetrical face. The charm was blinding, but beneath it, she noticed for the first time a sharp, predatory edge to his smile. The room suddenly felt vast and freezing. The $5,000 was sitting in a cashier's check in her purse, on the entryway table. It was all she had left in the world. Kendall stammered, the nausea returning with violent force, blurring the edges of her vision. "That's all the money I have. And I'm asking you to trust me, Kendall." His voice lost a fraction of its warmth, the cold command beneath the request surfacing just enough to paralyze her. "I thought we were building a life together. You said you wanted out of that miserable existence. I'm handing you the keys to the kingdom. Don't tell me you're hesitating over a temporary banking glitch." She looked at his heavy silver watch, then out the window at the glittering, unattainable city she had burned her entire life to the ground to reach. She had nowhere else to go. "Okay," Kendall swallowed hard, the word tasting like a death sentence. "I can get it for you tomorrow." Michael's smile returned, brilliant and instantly devoid of the previous tension. He kissed her forehead. "I knew you were the right woman for me." Monday morning arrived with a biting, overcast chill that seemed to seep through the glass windows of the artisanal coffee shop where Kendall sat. She stared at the glowing screen of her phone, her thumb hovering over the banking app icon. She took a slow breath, attempting to calm the frantic, erratic beating of her heart, and tapped the screen. Available balance, $14.50. No pending deposits. No $7,000 wire transfer from Michael's broker. Kendall swallowed hard. The artisanal latte she had splurged on suddenly tasted like battery acid. She minimized the app and opened her messages. Her last 3 texts to Michael, sent on Sunday evening, Sunday night, and an hour ago, sat in a neat, unanswered row. They lacked the delivered receipt. She tapped his contact name, lifting the phone to her ear. The line didn't even ring. It clicked immediately into a sterile, automated voice. "The number you have reached is disconnected or no longer in service." A cold, paralyzing numbness began at the base of her neck and radiated down her spine. It was just a glitch, she told herself, standing up so fast her chair scraped loudly against the polished concrete floor. Cell towers went down. Bank wires took 24 to 48 hours to clear across different institutions. There was a logical explanation. There had to be, because the alternative was a void so dark and terrifying she couldn't allow her mind to touch the edges of it. She walked the 3 blocks to Michael's building in a frantic, breathless blur. The Pearl District high-rise looked exactly the same. Sleek, imposing, a monument to the life she was owed. She pushed through the heavy revolving doors, the familiar scent of expensive sandalwood washing over her. She bypassed the concierge desk and walked straight to the private elevator bank. Her hands were shaking violently as she dug into her trench coat pocket, pulling out the sleek black key fob Michael had given her on Friday night, right after she had handed him the endorsed cashier's check for $5,000. She pressed the fob against the scanner. Beep! Red light. She tried again, pressing it harder against the plastic. Beep! Red light. "Excuse me, miss." A polite, perfectly modulated voice echoed from behind her. Kendall turned. The daytime concierge, a man in a crisp charcoal suit, was watching her with a practiced, professionally neutral expression. "Can I help you access a floor? That fob appears to be deactivated." "Yes, please," Kendall said, her voice sounding thin and foreign to her own ears. "It's for 14B, Michael Williams' apartment. The scanner must be malfunctioning." The concierge's brow furrowed infinitesimally. He walked back to his marble desk, typing something into a sleek computer monitor. Kendall followed him, her fingernails digging painfully into the palms of her hands. "I'm sorry, miss," the concierge said, looking up, his tone shifting from helpful to guarded. "Unit 14B is a corporate short-term rental. The previous guest checked out yesterday afternoon. The cleaning crew is up there now, preparing for the next arrival." The floor beneath Kendall seemed to tilt. The high ceiling of the lobby spun wildly. "No, you don't understand. He lives there. Michael Williams. He's renovating a penthouse. He's just staying there temporarily." The concierge turned the monitor slightly, though he kept the screen angled away. "There is no Michael Williams in our system, ma'am. The unit was booked under an LLC for a 4-day stay, paid in advance with a prepaid card. The guest left the keys in the express drop box at noon yesterday." Kendall stopped breathing. The air in the lobby was suddenly completely devoid of oxygen. The pieces of the puzzle, previously obscured by the blinding glare of Michael's charm and her own desperate greed, snapped together with bone-crushing force. There was no broker. There was no frozen account. There was no penthouse. Michael had found a waitress suffocating in a working-class life, rented a luxury backdrop for 4 days, and systematically extracted the exact amount of money she had stolen from her husband. He hadn't just taken her savings, he had taken the absolute last remnants of her security. "Ma'am?" the concierge asked, stepping around the desk, his voice laced with genuine concern as he noticed the sickening pallor of her skin. "Do you need me to call someone?" Kendall stumbled backward, shaking her head. She turned and practically ran out of the revolving doors, bursting back onto the freezing pavement. She collapsed against the brick wall of an alleyway, clutching her stomach as a violent wave of nausea overtook her. She retched dryly, gasping for air, the terrifying reality of the child growing inside her, suddenly magnified 1,000 times. She was pregnant. She was entirely alone. And she had absolutely nothing left. The downtown public library smelled of wet wool, old paper, and quiet desperation. It was a place for people who had nowhere else to go to escape the freezing rain. Kendall sat at computer terminal number 14, her damp trench coat clinging uncomfortably to her shoulders. The plastic keyboard was sticky, and the fluorescent lights overhead buzzed with a headache-inducing frequency. She had $14.50 to her name. Her cell phone had died an hour ago, a useless brick of glass in her pocket. She stared at the monitor, the harsh blue light illuminating the dark, bruised hollows under her eyes. For the past 2 hours, she had been typing every variation of Michael's name, his disconnected phone number, and the LLC the concierge had mentioned into the search engine. At first, there was nothing but dead ends, corporate registry pages leading to phantom addresses in Delaware, generic LinkedIn profiles that looked nothing like him. But desperation was a relentless engine. She began searching specific phrases he had used. International wire transfer, frozen. Temporary float for a contractor. Pearl District short-term rental. The search engine paused, a small loading wheel spinning on the screen. Then, the results populated. Her eyes locked onto a link halfway down the page. It was a local community forum, a thread buried under a section for fraud warnings. The title read, "Beware of the Frozen Asset Romance Scam, Portland Area." Kendall's hand trembled so violently she could barely operate the plastic mouse. She clicked the link. The page loaded, revealing a wall of text from an anonymous user. He called himself Mitchell, the first post read. He wore tailored suits, always smelled like sandalwood. He told me he was renovating a house in the West Hills. We dated for 3 weeks before his broker flagged an international wire transfer. He just needed $4,000 for a contractor deposit. The moment the cashier's check cleared, his phone disconnected. The house he took me to was an Airbnb. Kendall stopped breathing. The air in the library suddenly felt impossibly thin. She scrolled down, the movement of her finger robotic and stiff. "He went by Marcus for me," another user chimed in, dated 3 months prior. "He targeted me at a hotel bar, made me feel like I was the only woman in the room." Same story. Bank glitch. "I gave him my car down payment." Attached to the second post was a blurry, candid photograph taken across a restaurant table. Kendall leaned closer to the monitor, her breath fogging the glass. It was him, the same perfectly symmetrical face, the same heavy silver watch catching the light, the same charming, predatory smile that had convinced her to burn her entire life to the ground. She had believed she was special. She had believed she was meant for high-rises and champagne, that her working-class existence with Liam was a tragedy she was bravely escaping. The truth, glaring at her in pixelated black and white, was violently pathetic. She was just another waitress, another vulnerable mark in a meticulously crafted assembly line of extortion. A sharp, agonizing cramp twisted in her lower abdomen, a brutal reminder of the child she carried, a child whose father could be the steady, loyal man she had ruthlessly discarded, or the phantom grifter who had just stolen her future. The morning sickness rose in her throat, thick and acidic, mingling with a profound, suffocating shame. Kendall looked away from the screen, her gaze drifting over the other patrons in the library. A mother reading to her toddler, an elderly man reading a newspaper. People living ordinary, mundane lives, the exact kind of life she had despised and destroyed. She pressed her face into her hands, the rough sleeves of her damp coat scratching her skin. There were no tears. The devastation was too absolute, too hollow for crying. She sat in the buzzing silence of the public terminal, surrounded by strangers, realizing she had traded the only real love she had ever known for a ghost. and the transaction had left her with absolutely nothing. The industrial floodlights of the freight yard cast long, skeletal shadows across the cracked asphalt of the parking lot. The air tasted of diesel exhaust and impending frost. Kendall stood shivering beside the rusted passenger door of Liam's 10-year-old sedan, her arms wrapped tightly around her stomach. The black cashmere sweater, the armor she had worn to dismantle her marriage, was now stained, damp, and entirely inadequate against the biting wind. She had been standing there for 3 hours, her legs numb, her mind a fractured loop of terror and exhaustion. When the metal doors of the warehouse finally slid open to signal the end of the evening shift, a stream of exhausted men spilled out into the cold. Kendall shrank back against the car, her breath catching in her throat. She saw him. Liam walked with a heavy, mechanical limp, his shoulders stooped under the weight of an invisible burden. In just a week, he seemed to have aged 5 years. His jaw was covered in dark scruff, and his eyes, the kind, trusting eyes that had anchored her for 4 years, looked completely hollowed out. Beside him, Kevin was talking quietly, but Liam just nodded, staring blankly at the keys in his rough hand. Kevin spotted her first. His steps faltered, his expression instantly hardening into a mask of pure, protective hostility. He touched Liam's arm, gesturing toward the sedan. Liam stopped. He stood about 20 feet away, the harsh sodium lights illuminating the grease on his jacket and the dark circles under his eyes. He didn't drop his keys. He didn't rush forward to ask why she was standing in the freezing rain without a coat. The man who used to warm up this very car for 15 minutes so she wouldn't have to sit on cold seats, simply stared at her, perfectly still. "I'll handle this," Liam murmured to Kevin, his voice carrying over the low hum of the idling trucks. Kevin hesitated, casting one last venomous glare at Kendall before walking toward his own truck. Liam closed the distance slowly, stopping just out of arm's reach. He looked at her unkempt hair, the dark, bruised skin under her eyes, and the terrified tremor in her jaw. He looked for the expensive leather bag she had carried out of the bank, but she had nothing but her phone in her hand. "What are you doing here, Kendall?" His voice was gravelly, completely devoid of the warmth she had taken for granted every day of their marriage. It wasn't angry, it was terrifyingly empty. "Liam," she whispered, her voice cracking instantly. The sound of his name breaking past her lips shattered the last remaining wall of her pride. "I didn't have anywhere else to go." Liam's gaze drifted from her face to the frozen asphalt. "You have a new life. You took the money. You made sure I had nothing left to give you." He took it, the words rushed out of her in a pathetic, frantic sob. She took a step forward, but Liam immediately took a step back, the physical rejection hitting her like a blow to the chest. He took everything. It was a lie. The apartment, his name, all of it. He was a grifter, Liam. "I'm broke. I haven't eaten since yesterday. I don't even have a place to sleep." She waited for the shock, for the vindication, or even the rage. She waited for him to yell. But Liam just watched her, the slow realization settling over his tired features. He was looking at a stranger. The woman who had coldly stripped his name from their lease just days ago was now begging for scraps in a parking lot. "I'm pregnant, Liam," she choked out, playing her final, most devastating card, the secret she had buried beneath paper towels in the diner. "I'm pregnant, and I am so scared." The silence that followed was absolute. The roar of a diesel engine starting across the lot felt miles away. Liam stared at her stomach, his chest rising and falling in a slow, ragged breath. He didn't ask if it was his. The agonizing math, the overlapping timelines of her sudden cruelty, and this new revelation did the work for him. The devastation in his eyes deepened into something dark, bottomless, and entirely broken. The rain picked up, turning from a mist into hard, freezing drops that pattered against the rusted roof of the old sedan. Kendall shivered violently, her arms still wrapped protectively around her waist. She waited for Liam's innate goodness, the very trait she had despised as weakness just weeks ago, to kick in. She waited for him to take off his heavy, grease-stained jacket and wrap it around her trembling shoulders. She waited for him to surrender, because he always did. But Liam's hands remained shoved deep into his pockets. "Liam, please," Kendall begged, her teeth chattering, the rainwater plastering her dark hair against her pale cheeks. "I know I hurt you. I know I was awful. But I have absolutely nothing. If not for me, then for the baby. It could be yours. You always wanted a family." The words hung in the freezing air, toxic and desperate. Liam stared at her, a muscle feathering along his jawline. For 4 years, his entire existence had been calibrated to solve her problems. He had worked double shifts to buy her a better mattress. He had skipped lunches so she could afford decent winter boots. The instinct to save her was a deeply ingrained muscle memory, pulling painfully at his chest. He looked down at her stomach. "It could be yours, and it could be his," Liam said, his voice dropping to a harsh, rasping whisper that cut through the rumble of the idling trucks across the lot. "The man you stole my life for." Kendall flinched as if he had physically struck her. "I made a mistake." "A terrible, stupid mistake. I was suffocating in that apartment, and he manipulated me. He played me. Liam, he didn't make you sign those papers at the bank, Kendall," Liam replied, his tone chillingly level. The initial shock of seeing her was fading, replaced by a cold, protective clarity. "He didn't make you look me in the eye and tell me I was nothing but a warehouse worker who would never be enough. You did that. You broke us down to the studs so you could build a penthouse on top of the rubble. The only mistake you're crying over is that the penthouse wasn't real." Kendall let out a ragged sob, her knees buckling slightly against the wet asphalt. "Please, just let me get in the car. Let me sleep on the floor of the motel room. I won't ask for anything else, just for tonight." Liam took a slow step backward, resting his hand on the handle of his car door. The metal was freezing against his calloused skin. He looked at the woman weeping under the harsh sodium lights, desperately searching for the girl he had married, the girl he had shared cherry pie with in the dim light of their tiny kitchen. She was entirely gone. In her place stood a stranger who had set his house on fire and was now complaining about the cold. If he opened that door, he would never escape the burning building. "I'm sorry you're pregnant, Kendall, and I'm sorry you got conned," Liam said slowly, every word carrying the heavy, agonizing weight of finality. "But you chose to sever all ties. You told me you wanted nothing to do with my life. You got exactly what you asked for." "Liam, you can't just leave me here," she screamed, the panic rising to a hysterical pitch as he pulled the car door open. "I am carrying a child." "Then go to a women's shelter," Liam said, his voice finally breaking, betraying the immense bleeding wound beneath his stoic facade. "Call your brother, call the police, but do not call me. I have nothing left for you to take." He slid into the driver's seat and pulled the door shut with a solid, echoing thud. Through the rain-streaked glass, he watched Kendall slam her bare hands against the window, her mouth opening in a silent, desperate wail. Liam stared straight ahead. His hand trembled violently as he turned the key in the ignition. He put the car in drive and slowly pulled out of the parking lot, the headlights cutting through the freezing rain, leaving Kendall standing completely alone in the toxic, desolate dark she had built for herself. 18 months later, the mid-October air carried the crisp, clean scent of crushed maple leaves and distant wood smoke, a sharp, grounding contrast to the damp, metallic exhaust of the downtown freight yards. Liam Moore sat on the top step of his front porch, a ceramic mug of black coffee resting comfortably between his knees. He wore a faded flannel shirt and denim jeans, his heavy work boots untied. Behind him stood a modest, single-story house with a freshly painted navy blue door and a small front lawn. It was a fixer-upper, bought with the grueling overtime hours he had relentlessly picked up after the divorce. He had sanded the hardwood floors himself. He had patched the roof. Every nail, every drop of paint was a testament to his survival. The crushing, suffocating weight of the motel room was a distant memory. His jaw was relaxed, the dark circles under his eyes completely gone. For the first time in years, the silence around him did not feel like a threat. It felt like peace. 30 yards away, half swallowed by the creeping dusk and the deep shadows of a massive oak tree, Kendall stood perfectly still. She wore a thin, unremarkable beige coat, bought from a thrift store 2 towns over, and her dark hair was pulled back in a severe, messy knot. Her face was pale, hollowed out by the relentless grind of single motherhood and minimum-wage retail shifts. The glamorous illusion of Michael Williams, the high-rise in the Pearl District, the cashmere sweaters, they felt like a fever dream belonging to a completely different woman. The reality she woke up to every day was a cramped, subsidized studio apartment and the exhaustion of raising a child entirely on her own. She had taken 2 different city buses to get here. She didn't know what she was looking for. Absolution, perhaps. Or maybe just a masochistic need to see the physical manifestation of her catastrophic failure. Kendall stared at the house. It wasn't a penthouse. It wasn't dripping with luxury or status. It was exactly the kind of house Liam had promised when they were struggling in that damp, peeling apartment. A quiet, safe place with a porch and a driveway. The life she had deemed inadequate, the man she had ruthlessly discarded as not enough, was sitting right there, warm and real, while she was a ghost shivering in the cold. A sharp, agonizing ache bloomed in her chest, a grief so profound and heavy it made her knees tremble. She had burned down a solid, devoted love for a shimmering mirage, and the ashes had suffocated her. On the porch, Liam stretched his arms overhead, taking a deep breath of the autumn air. He picked up his empty coffee mug and stood. For a fleeting, terrifying second, his gaze swept over the street, sweeping past the parked cars and the large oak tree. Kendall held her breath, her fingernails digging into her palms. A desperate, pathetic part of her wanted him to see her, to walk down the driveway and offer her the grace she fundamentally did not deserve. But Liam's eyes didn't stop. He looked right past the shadows. To him, the street was just a quiet suburban road. He turned his back to the street, pushed open the navy blue door, and stepped inside his warm, brightly lit hallway. The door closed behind him. A second later, the heavy brass deadbolt turned with a loud, absolute click that echoed across the quiet pavement. The porch light flicked off, plunging the yard into twilight. Kendall stood alone on the uneven sidewalk, the biting wind cutting through her thin coat. She looked at the locked door of the house that should have been hers, wrapped her arms tightly around herself, and turned back toward the bus stop, walking slowly into the desolate, freezing dark.